Today I'm going to be talking about something that often flies under our radar in what I call founder-led growth. This is really the foundational and benchmark level stuff that we founders need to be thinking about early on in our journey. For many of us in the startup world, the earliest days of building our startup are exciting, but they're also very uncertain. And it's a time when things like growth marketing and channel marketing just aren't really super viable yet. We're really just in survival mode at this point. We're really trying to find our first customers. So before the marketing budgets expand and your sales team grows and you hire people, there's this critical phase where it's all on us to turn the gears of progress for our organization. And this topic hits really close to home for me because I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've had to do this a bunch of different times. So the hustle, the late nights, and this relentless pursuit to find this first batch of customers that become loyal, hopefully. And it's a story of how I and many of you are likely beginning your journey to what our companies are hopefully going to become and what some of our companies are today. So in this episode, we're going to explore what founder-led growth is, why it's indispensable, and how embracing founder-led growth as the foundation for everything else that follows is really, really important. So whether you're just starting out or looking to inject some new life into your venture, stay with me as I uncover what this topic is. So what exactly is founder-led growth? This is the term that I use to describe the very hacky, early, hands-on efforts that founders undertake to get their startups off of the ground. It's the kind of stuff that you're working on before you have anybody else helping, or before you have a marketing team, before you have any scalable systems. And this often is before you're even really sure what your core product even is going to become. This is the really hacky, often creative, and often very scrappy set of ways where you frankly find those first customers. It's the stuff that doesn't scale, but is critical for getting people that can ultimately believe in your vision. And this is stuff that gets overlooked so often when we look at more glamorous, big picture marketing strategies that other bigger companies are going to focus on, or when we look at viral success stories, or when we look at our peers that are just much further along. The future of your marketing and growth is really started in these early founder-led days, and some of it is just simply not sexy. So here's one of my stories with founder-led growth, and I wanted to share with you the ways that I found my first 10 or so customers for the company that eventually became Velocity Growth. And I say it eventually became Velocity Growth because at first this company was actually a side hustle, and then it was another side hustle, and then it was a small consulting company, and then it became Growth University, where we really hit product market fit, and then we pivoted and rebranded to Velocity Growth. But in the earliest of days, how I got my first 10 customers or so was a mix of tactics. Some that I just happened to stumble upon, and some that were definitely a lot more deliberate. So going way back, I had a hypothesis for my business that a lot of founders were really struggling with how to think about growing their companies. And at this point, I had already started to spend countless hours answering questions on Reddit and Quora and other platforms, diving into discussions about growth and marketing, and really just trying to provide value and establish credibility. At the time, I was a in-house leader at a couple different companies, working with teams for growth stage companies. I had also been spending a lot of time as a top-ranked mentor on Growth Mentor, and I had at this point done probably 100 calls on the platform or so, which not only was providing value back to others, but also helped me hone my own understanding of the challenges that these startups that I was talking to were facing. I mean, a great way to learn is just by talking to peers. So when I first had my initial offering, which was a course that I had put together that distilled a whole bunch of information and context that I had about how to actually grow a startup, this content became a lot of what we ended up teaching with Growth University, and ultimately became some of the foundational work that we're still doing to this day with a lot of the work we work with customers on at Velocity Growth. But at the time, I didn't really have an audience, but I had a really simple offer. So I reached out to my founder friends, and essentially what I did was I would just offer to help them with their growth strategy. So I would take calls, I would get in the weeds and look at their growth models. I would help them with customer acquisition. I would look at their SEO. I would look at their ads. I would give them feedback. I'd help them write content. Most of the time, I'm just doing this for free, by the way. But what started to happen was they started referring me to other friends, and I started to get word of mouth recommendations. Like, hey, this guy, Craig, he kind of knows what he's talking about. And that led to getting some speaking engagements at events. I would sometimes get invited. Sometimes I would just invite myself to speak. So if I saw that somebody was putting on a masterclass or a session, I still do this. I would literally invite myself, raise my hand and say, hey, I'm pretty good at speaking about topic X, Y, or Z. Will you have me come in? And I was that person that would do that. And it kind of worked, right? So this is a great way to just build your network. It's just be out there hustling and hacking and talking to people. They're not necessarily going to be customers or partners yet, but if you put in the work and you build those relationships, oftentimes it pays off. So I said yes to literally any podcast that would have me on. I've been on some stuff that got almost no visibility at all, but it didn't matter. It still doesn't matter to me. What matters is that I'm able to provide some value back to however small of an audience it is. Love to get on to podcasts that are bigger, but whatever. Sharing my insights and learning from others was what it's all about for me, and it still is to that day. Then I started doing group Ask Me Anything sessions all about growth for the Launch Accelerator portfolio companies, which was not only rewarding for me, but also, again, a great way to network with these companies who are also in a stage where I thought my offer was maybe viable for them as well. This started to evolve. So in the beginning, when I was just getting started, I had no audience. My email list was tiny, like really tiny. The first email that I sent out, I always like to share this story. I think I sent it to like 13 people. And the response was essentially crickets. Like nobody really cared about who I was and what I was up to. But when I'd get somebody on the phone, or if I was talking to somebody in person or at a conference, they were like, hey, he kind of knows what he's talking about. Like I trust this guy, Craig. But I kept at it. And so even though I only had 13 people on my list at the time, I would consistently send out regular updates about growth tactics, share what I was learning, and slowly I began to grow that list. And eventually people started to take notice. And then something interesting started to happen. So I had this course that I had put together, and literally the first time I tried to promote it, I kind of got a half sale. Like I had to discount my first course by 50% just to get one person to buy it. I mean, that's how small we're talking. I mean, it's really embarrassing stuff, right? But eventually people started to ask for help with growing their startups. And that's when I started to know that I was onto something. And my product and packaging became more clear. Took a little while to figure that out. But all of those early efforts of just hustling and having conversations and mentoring people led that groundwork for everything that followed. And so you may be thinking, okay, well, what about things like channel marketing and paid ads and influencer marketing? Like, can't I just focus on that stuff right out of the gates? And the truth is that channel marketing and some of these deeper channels, they're really wonderful, but they're really tough to leverage as your 0 to 1 growth engine. If you don't have any sense of product market fit, or even before that, if you don't even know how to communicate the value that you could provide, which by the way, you generally learn by talking to other humans. Like it's hard to understand from somebody what value you're providing to them if you don't actually talk to them. So you can't really skip that step. If you're not doing that, it's like basically dropping cash into a drain that leads to nowhere, right? Like if you don't know who your customers are yet, or what they want and how your product fits into their lives and how you add value, then you can't really yet think about scaling marketing. And this is why founder-led growth is so important, because it's basically all about building that foundation one brick at a time and eventually figuring out how to build and connect that value back to your user. Now, you might be able to do some of that work through traditional marketing channels. So for example, if you've got a product or a solution that people are searching for, sure, you can go buy some ads on Google and you can drive some traffic and maybe you'll get some conversions, or maybe you'll blow a bunch of money. You could put your thought leadership out there in the wild, but it's going to take you many, many, many months and a lot of conversations to grind through that positioning and that offer well before you've got anything that's going to work super effectively or efficiently in paid channels. And you're probably even too early for organic search at this point, right? Because again, if you don't really know how to talk about the value you provide because you haven't talked to many people about it and you haven't solved problems for them yet, why are you going to spend a bunch of time on search engine optimization when you have no idea how those efforts are going to resonate? So founder-led growth really is all about going back to basics. Talk to people you know. Talk to people you don't know. Inject yourself into conversations online and offline. Show up at conferences where people in your industry are hanging out. Pitch. Talk about your value. Get your stuff out into the wild. Have some thought leadership that you put out there. Build your LinkedIn audience. Contrary to what a lot of thought leaders say, like just focus on doing one thing, you just don't really have that luxury yet because you don't yet know what's going to work. So this is really, really early stage stuff. Don't undervalue these efforts though, right? Founder-led growth takes a while. It's not scalable, but you cannot delegate your way out of the earliest stages of growth. You just can't do it. This is when you have to connect the value of your brand, your service, your product, your offer to a group of people, and you're going to be the best one at doing that because you're the founder. So do the little things, show up, put in the work, and eventually, over time, it'll start to pay off. Trust in the process, and if you do provide value, it will come back full circle. So think back to, where I started with total crickets and not even sure of what my offer even was, to running a very successful business now, about 3 years later. That prep work, that founder-led work took a good, solid 2 years of foundational work before I had something that was really viable to scale. So if you haven't yet quit your job and you can do this on the side, more power to you. I would recommend that you do that before you go burn all of your cash on your idea if it's not validated yet.